So let's talk about Cicero and basically his works. We're going to focus in on his the work that we're reading in this class. And as I mentioned already, Cicero was famous even in his own lifetime for a number of works that he wrote. Remember, the in order to get published, you actually had to have somebody handwrite. That's why they were called manuscripts, because they were handwritten, handwritten script manuscripts. And so Cicero actually had a secretary. He was a slave, somebody that he ended up freeing toward the end of his life, um, but who basically was a male servant who wrote all of his books out and then made a few other copies, handwritten. They called them clean copies. Well, in order for a book to be published, it had to actually be copied by hand by other people. And they didn't, later on, monasteries would be sort of the factories for this. But before that, a bestseller might have as many as 100 copies that might have been copied, by hand copied. And that was it. That was a run, that was a print run for these manuscript books. So later on, when the monks and the monasteries would do these, as a living, you might get a few more copies, but you never had that many copies of any one book in this time period. So you see over on the right, there is a medieval copy of this book on duties, De Officiis, that was produced by a monastery, handwritten by a monk. And so but we had his works were preserved, and he wrote on politics, on philosophy, on ethics, on a variety of other topics, even scientific types of things. He was what we call a polymath. He studied across the spectrum. Part of that was because of his education in Greece, but he wanted to bring some of these ideas that he had learned from the Greeks and during his lifetime and integrate those and pass those on to the next generation of Romans. So he's not credited with a lot of original thought. Okay, so that's the one criticism that people level at Cicero is that he wasn't an original thinker, which once again is something that's a little typical of the Romans, right? But what he did for us in our culture is he took a lot of these sort of abstract concepts and he put them into real life. And so I believe that to the degree that he was original was in his application of these ideas in the real context of life as a Roman, life as a person who lived in a republic, and things like that. And so in his book on duties, he has a lot of practical application of these things. And the portion that you read isn't going to have a whole lot of that. But the rest of the book, he does actually, because he's packaging this stuff for his son, he will actually give specific examples of, well, if you find yourself in this situation, then this is the way to deal with it. And sometimes, we find ourselves in situations where it's kind of hard to know what's right from wrong. And he's trying to provide a guidebook for navigating those types of difficult situations. So, we're going to talk about these things. Is morality natural? Is it part of the created world? And this is something that would be adapted by Christian philosophers later, who would come up with the notion of natural law and natural morality. A lot of this is pulled from Cicero's thought. The difference between animals and humans. This is something that again, Christian philosophers would build on this, and a lot of other people would talk about this as sort of the seedbed for why humans need to think about things and be careful, because we aren't animals. I mean, we are part of the animal family, but we have capacities that the animals don't have. So, and then what are the cardinal virtues? And this is sort of the crux of Cicero's thought, which is once again not original to him, and maybe not even original to the ancient Greeks who developed these ideas, but they are preserved through Cicero. And because they are preserved through Cicero, they are infused into the Christian mindset in the Middle Ages. And as Christianity begins to develop and starts to look at doctrinal issues and these types of things, one of the things that Christianity would, they would get rid of a lot of stuff that was considered, labeled pagan. But you had figures like St. Augustine and other important figures who would look at these things and say, what can we keep? What is, as St. Augustine called it, what's the Egyptian gold that we can pull out of these ideas and continue to use? All truth is God's truth, even if it comes from a pagan, they would say. So these four virtues were considered a central aspect of the truth that came out of the pagan world that is still considered to be an essential part of Christian belief, believe it or not. And so Cicero delineates these four: wisdom, justice, fortitude, and temperance. Wisdom being discernment and finding ways to become more wise. And the way you become more wise is not just through experience, but also by seeking knowledge, learning from others, learning from the experience of others. So this is why, there's a general respect for elders, which for most of us doesn't really kick in until we're in our mid 20s. In our mid 20s, we start to really experience real life for ourselves for the first time. And I remember in my mid 20s how wise my parents suddenly became. I hadn't had a whole lot of use for what they had to say until I got into my mid 20s, and then all of a sudden I'm like, Dad, I need your help. So part of gaining wisdom is seeking knowledge and learning from the wisdom of others. Justice, which Cicero calls as the highest virtue, not taking advantage, not lying. Fortitude, which is one that we've explored with Job and Penelope and other characters. Courage, heroism, sacrifice, greatness of spirit, and then temperance, which is very important in a lot of the writings of people like Dante and others, where they would talk about moderation, self-control, and discipline. So you get in the Aeneid the essential nature of temperance and how important it is to fulfilling your responsibilities. Because if we don't have temperance, we're chasing our passions all the time. And that, again, is what advertising tells us to do. It tells us to chase not just our dreams, but our passions. And sometimes our passions can trip us up. Sometimes they can cheat us. Sometimes they can lie to us. And we can be deluded following our desires and our passions. They may not actually have our best interests at heart. And part of what has made the ideas that Cicero expresses in this book in particular so enduring is that he wrote this in a time period in Rome when things were literally falling apart. The Republic was coming to an end, but it, the mess that was society in Rome at that time is very difficult to express. The political system was totally broken. They could not get anything done. Corruption, bribery, dispensing with favors, backroom deals. Some of the, talked about some of the court cases that Cicero took were the powerful taking advantage of the less powerful. All of these types of things happening, and then you had, the issue of the poor. That was a burgeoning new aspect of Roman society and was very difficult. They didn't know how to handle it. We still don't know how to handle it. We're still dealing with these issues. So Cicero was writing these types of things in an era when things are kind of falling apart, and it sort of elevates the question, is there ever a time, is there ever an emergency when you don't do what's right? And part of what Cicero is saying here is it doesn't matter how bad things get, you still must do right. In fact, it's in times of desperation that it's super important for us to do the right thing. And sometimes we get in a mindset that, things are tough, so let's suspend the rules. No, that's the time when we've got to hunker down and do what needs to be done. So good faith is a foundation for law and commerce. If you don't have good faith, if you don't have trust, then you cannot have trade. You cannot have law, a society of laws. Moral right versus expedience. We live in a time, and Cicero did as well, when It was not always convenient to do the right thing. Sometimes doing the right thing meant came at a cost to oneself. Cicero saying, no, ultimately, it's not about you. It's about all of the effects around you. And so do what's right, even if it's not expedient. The vital importance of willing collaboration and goodwill in public affairs, basically civil, being civil to one another, which is something that unfortunately we're dealing with a similar situation to what the Romans had, where we don't have a lot of civility in public discourse. And so it's upon us. And I encourage all of us, even in social media and places like that, don't get into these, vicious fights. Um, Sometimes people get vicious over, whoever they're whatever they're fans of. They just attack each other. It's crazy, the whole Star Wars social media world where people just are so vicious and ugly to each other. No, don't be involved in that type of thing. We need willing collaboration and goodwill, and we need to model that good character and good reputation. And that's something that we're struggling with right now. Is it that important? There was a time where Christians in the public sphere would say character matters. Well, all of a sudden, that doesn't seem to be the case. And when Christians, sorry that I'm preaching here, but when Christians back off of the good character thing and say there are elements that are more important than good character, maybe that's not a good thing. Generosity, helping the oppressed, the captive, and those who are worthy. And Cicero makes an important point, and I don't think it's in our reading, where he says you can't help everybody, but you can help the people that are close to you. You can help the people that are in your sphere. The people that you can help in the sphere that you're given, those are the people that we are all responsible to help. So, in each phase of his life where he was able to help people, he did. When he was an attorney, he helped people in that capacity. When he was a governor, he was able to help a whole lot more people. So, sometimes we have a pretty small sphere of influence, but that does not relieve us of the responsibility of helping those that we can in that area of responsibility. We talk about redemptive service, ethical action. These are important. These are core values of the institution where we're at Lee University. And so, service is about helping those that we can help in the sphere that we can. These other aspects, ethical action, all of which lead to this notion of responsible citizenship. Um, Very Ciceronian ideas, if you were. And then he talks about the importance of private property. And, there are some people that are like, we should share and all that kind of stuff, and that's fine. I think we do have some biblical models for not being so obsessive about private property. However, private property must be protected in order for the rule of law to mean something, according to Cicero. And just his legacy has been enormous. Many of his writings have been preserved and passed on, which I've made mention of before. A strong conservator of values and a shaper of discourse, he constantly quoted, constantly referred to, especially by people who were forming this nation back in the 18th century. And then he would be quoted extensively as elements of a classical education continued all the way through into the 20th century. Then education got heavily reformed and this type of stuff got set aside. So unfortunately, by the time many of us went to school, we weren't studying this kind of thing anymore, which I think a sad thing. Major influential figures: Ambrose, Jerome, Augustine, and Boethius, all of whom you may not be familiar with them. These are the big brains in Christian thinking in the 400s and 500s, and they all quoted Cicero. They were all beholden to him. There was an 11th century revival, classical education. Later, pre-Renaissance thinkers, same thing, heavy influence there. Aquinas, Dante, Chaucer, Petrarch. Renaissance ideals and Reformation virtues. Just forget that little Latin phrase right there. The Enlightenment. And then people like C.S. Lewis. He wouldn't necessarily identify Cicero, but he talks a lot about his ideas. And hopefully in class we'll get time to kind of unpack some of Cicero's quotes and also some of the where we get Cicero's ideas appearing in Mere Christianity. All right, we're done.